Welcome to the Crazy Hat Chemist. So here we go with another video on chemistry. This is the source for all your chemistry needs and desires is right here at the Crazy Hat Chemist. Crazy Hat Chemist. All right, so today, what are we doing today? We are doing the following. How to round numbers correctly. This is worksheet number 1, how to round numbers correctly. All right, so let's see, here we go. We are going to do a couple of examples first before we do how to round numbers correctly. I'm assuming that you understand the basics of how to round. So let's give this a try. Okay. And so this is what we're going to do. It's really simple. We got 2 rules to cover here. All right. So rule number 1. And let's see if I zoom on out just a little bit so that we can have this all on here. Yep, there we go. Perfect. Okay. All right. So rule number 1. Rule number 1 is if the number to the right is less than 5, that is a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, then you're going to truncate or chop the number. That is rule number 1. Rule number 2. If the number to the right is equal to or greater than 5, that is a 5, a 6, 7, 8, or a 9, then add 1 to the preceding digit. Folks, that's it. It's as simple as that. That's how you round numbers correctly. So let's give a couple examples as to how to round numbers correctly. All right. So let's say if the proper round, so we did a multiplication of these 2 numbers. This is our calculator value right here. And if the proper rounding is to 2 numbers, then we're going to go 1, 2, and we're rounding with that 2. That 2 with where the arrow is less than 5. We're going to chop and truncate the number, and we would get 8.1 for rounding. All right. Perfect. If our proper rounding is to 3 numbers, then we're going to look at 1, 2, 3 numbers, and we are rounding with this 6. That 6 is 5 or greater. I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. This will become 8.13. We added 1 to the 2. That was the preceding digit. Okay. If the proper rounding for this number is to 4 numbers, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm looking at that 0 for rounding. That 0 is a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. I'm going to chop or truncate the number. I will have 8.126, and then that will be my answer. It's that simple. All right, we have 30 problems to do. So let's see if we can hammer out these 30 problems in no time at all. This won't take very long because this is simple here. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do the following problems. I'm going to zoom in on this so that you can see this in more detail, zoomed on in. And this is our, at the moment, we are going to round to 3 numbers. We haven't discussed any other issue except rounding to 3 numbers. So here we go. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm looking at that 5 for rounding. That 5 is a 5, 6, 7, 8, or a 9. So I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. The rounded number correctly would be 8, 5, and a 7. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm using that 8 for rounding. That is greater than, that is 5 or greater. I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. That's 801. Leading zeros don't count, and that is 1, 2, 3, and 3 numbers. I'm going to chop or truncate the number since that 0 is 0 through 4. So I'm going to have 0.139. Remember, I'm going to have 3 numbers on all of these. Okay, so here we go. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with this 6. That's 5 or greater. I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. It becomes 5.61. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 3. That is a 4. That is 0 through 4. I'm going to chop or truncate the number. That becomes 3.08. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 9. That's 5 or greater. I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. That's 1.01. All right, I'm going to scroll this up, and don't forget, we are rounding only to 3 numbers. These are not significant figures. We are just rounding it to 3 numbers right now. Just learning the rules of rounding. All right, here we go. Some more problems to knock out. So we've got 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 7. That's a leading 0. So I'm going to have 0.57. And this 7 is 5 or greater. I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. That becomes a 9. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 0. This is an exponential notation, so I must keep this. That 0 is less than 5, so I'm going to chop the number. So 1.00 times 10 to the 5. Okay, perfect. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 6. That's 5 or greater. Add 1 to the preceding digit, 1.01. And then I cannot disregard this times 10 to the negative 3. And I have 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 9. Pay attention to this one here. That 9, I'm going to add 1 to 9. 9 becomes 10. I cannot fit that in one column, so I need to add 1 to the next number. That 8 becomes a 9. Now I have 2.9, and I need 3 numbers. So there's a 0 that I must tack on there to have 3 numbers. Leading zeros don't matter. 1, 2, 3. I'm rounding with that 8. That's 5 or greater. Add 1 to that 0. 0.521. All right. We're going to scroll this on up just a little bit more so we can have the rest of this 15 problems here. Awesome. Here we go. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 3. I'm going to chop or truncate the number. That's 200. 1, 2, 3. I am rounding with that 4. Chop the number 200. Remember, we are looking just for 3 numbers. There we go. We have not talked about significant figures. 1, 2, 3, rounding with that 0. By the way, if we were talking about significant figures, we would need decimal places right here at these places. I'm going to chop or truncate the number 150, and that has 3 numbers. Again, if we are looking at significant figures, we'd have to have a decimal here for that to be significant. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 0. That's 30.8. There we go. That's perfect. Now we are time for midway through our whole entire worksheet. I am the Crazy Hat Chemist. Please watch my videos on YouTube and subscribe and give me a thumbs up. All right, here we go. We're going to do the other half that way we got 16 through 30 left to do, and this won't take very much longer. I hope you're hanging on. This is not that difficult. This is pretty easy. We've got this nailed. Okay, here we go. Throwing out a few paperweights there so I don't move the paper too much. We got 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 9. All right, another peculiar one here. I'm going to add 1 to that 9. That's a 10. I cannot fit that in one column, so I need to add 1 to the next digit. So that'll be 6, 1, 0. And if we were looking at significant figures, there would be a decimal on there, just to make sure. That's 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 8. That's 5 or greater. I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. That's 0.307. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm using that 5 for rounding. That's 5 or greater. Add 1 to the preceding digit. That's 0.486. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm using that 8 for rounding. That's 5 or greater. Add 1 to the preceding digit. That's 504. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding that not with the 9. That's greater than 5 or greater. Add 1 to the preceding digit. 755. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm using that 5 for rounding. That's 5 or greater. I'm going to add 1 to the preceding digit. That's 3.06. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm using that 0 for rounding. Chop the number since it's 0 through 4. That's 348. Fantastic. We're going to scroll this on up so we do a little bit more so you can see more of what's going on. Here we go. Fantastic. Boom. Nothing like a little advertisement here. So we've got 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 0. I'm going to chop the number. That's 0.300. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 1. That's 0 through 4. I'm going to chop the number 0.100. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with the 8. That's 5 or greater. Add 1 to the preceding digit. 0.822. Okay, 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 9. Add 1 to the preceding digit. Since the 9 is 5 or greater, that's 801. Okay, I'm going to scroll this on up till we get to the last of our problems here, and then we're going to just be done with this whole entire worksheet here in lickety-split time. Not a problem at all. Okay, we got 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 0. I'm going to chop the number 100. Now, again, if we were looking at significant figures, I would have to put a decimal on that one. 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 2. I am going to chop the number. That's that's 2.67. And yes, you do need to include the times 10 to the 2. So times 10 to the 2. Okay, that is placeholders, and those are very, very important. Okay, we got 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm rounding with that 1. That's 0 through 4. Chop the number 8.00 times 10 to the 4. And then last one, 1, 2, 3 numbers, rounding with that 6. That's 5 or greater. Add 1 to the preceding digit. That's 2.09. And then times 10 to the negative 2. Well, that's all, folks. That's all we've got. And again, remember, I am the Crazy Hat Chemist. Please watch my videos on YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and like and subscribe. Love you guys a lot. Talk to you later. Bye for now.